Hello and welcome. My name is Dan Rodney, and today's live stream is going to be an intro to Adobe InDesign. For those of you who aren't familiar, Noble Desktop is a training center located in New York City, but we also do live training that anybody can attend from anywhere online. Today's seminar is going to be a lecture-style seminar, unlike our hands-on classes where those are both lecture and hands-on parts for our regular classes. But in these live streams, we like to get people started and give them an introduction to a program such as InDesign. So my background is that I've been a designer for over 20 years. I got started actually using Quark Express before InDesign was ever released, and as soon as I saw InDesign, I knew that this was going to be the new program that was going to kick Quark off of its throne at the time, because everybody used Quark Express before InDesign. I tried the first version. It wasn't actually ready, but I knew that it was going to be good, and so it was really with the second version of InDesign that I could actually start using it, and have been using it ever since. I've done everything from business cards all the way up through books, so I've done a lot of different things with InDesign, and let's take a look at what we're going to be covering tonight. So we're going to see, of course, what InDesign can do. I'll show you some examples of the kind of work that you would build in InDesign. I'll quickly talk about which Creative Cloud plan you should purchase, and I'm going to give you a tutorial so you can start using InDesign. So I'll do a hands-on tutorial showing you how to use the application. And of course, we can't cover everything in the time that we have today, but I'll give you ways to continue learning. So what can InDesign do? It is a page layout program primarily focused on print design. You can combine text and graphics on one or more pages. So it's really good at long documents, but it can do something as simple as a single page that's very small, like a business card. But anything that combines text and graphics, InDesign can be good at doing that, although it's primarily a print design program. It is great at long documents, so it has excellent typography controls and ways to manage pages. So really, multi-page documents are good to create in InDesign. So books and magazines, brochures, those things are good to create in InDesign. It also can export PDFs. Now these can be printable PDFs, but also it can be just electronic PDFs. So if you want to create a good quality PDF, InDesign is a great place to create them. You can even add interactive forms with text fields and menus and stuff to PDFs. A lot of times you'd have to do that in something like Acrobat, but you can actually create those PDFs in InDesign. So while I say that InDesign is primarily a print design program, it can create digital content such as PDFs. And it can also export PNGs and JPEGs, so you can also create digital content as well, although that's not its main focus. It also can create ebooks. It can export EPUB files, which then can be converted for Kindle as well. It can create reflowable EPUBs or fixed layout EPUBs. But when you're creating an ebook, you do need to set up the file specifically so that it will export a good quality ebook. It's not as simple as just taking a print book, for example, and just saying, let's export an ebook. There's a good chance that the way you set it up for print is not going to be good for ebook as well. So you're probably going to have to do some work, sometimes considerable work, to prep a file for ebooks. So don't think you're just going to have one file that you just export a printable PDF and export an EPUB and it'll all be perfect. You're probably going to have to do some work. So the files would have to be set up properly. So let's take a look at some examples of things that you can do with InDesign. You can create book interiors, lay out all the pages of a book. When I used to tell people that I worked on books, they're like, oh, so you did the jackets? I'm like, well, that's one of the things that I did. But I also did like all the hundreds of pages that come in between. So InDesign is excellent at managing all those pages and doing all the layouts. Another example of book interiors here, just a little bit of a different type of book here. And of course you can do the book covers actually. I even created a special add-on called Make Book Jacket, which a lot of publishers use to make it easier to create those book jackets. So a lot of the top publishers use this add-on that I created. But you don't have to use that. You can create it manually yourself. But if you do create a lot of them, that little add-on is nice. But yeah, you can create the book cover, design all the stuff that's going to be put on there. And this one is typographic heavy, but it can be visuals or anything that you want. InDesign is good at combining text and graphics. magazines, magazine covers, magazine interiors can be created in InDesign. So anything multi-page, InDesign is good at doing. But can also be branding. So it can be as simple as a business card, an envelope, a letterhead. Now, a lot of times you're going to use this in combination with something like Illustrator or Photoshop, especially Illustrator for creating the logo, bring it into InDesign and lay it out with the other things. So InDesign is good at where things come together. So when you have graphics from Illustrator and Photoshop coming together with type, and especially if there's multiple pages, that's where InDesign is good. So for example, advertising. Now this could be print advertising. It can also be social media graphics, although I might create those in Illustrator or Photoshop a bit more, but it can export as PNGs and JPEGs that you can use on social media, although that's not really its primary focus. But you often will combine retouching and graphics created in Photoshop and Illustrator, bring it into InDesign, and maybe some of that type is created in InDesign. If there's more specialized things done to that, maybe it's created in Illustrator or special effects added in Photoshop. So InDesign can be the meeting place of where everything comes together. And it is primarily focused on print, but it can also do digital content as well. So let's just really briefly talk about the Creative Cloud plan, because if you're going to get InDesign, you do need to be a member of the Creative Cloud. If all you need is InDesign, you would just get the individual plan. Keep in mind that all of this pricing is as of now with US dollars. If you're in another country, it would be a different price. So right now, InDesign is $20.99 plus tax if you commit for a year. And so you commit to paying that per month for a year, and then at the end of that year, you can decide if you want to renew again. So if you just need InDesign, just get the single individual app plan. If you need InDesign with, let's say, Photoshop and Illustrator or other programs, you would want to get the all apps plan. So this actually links out to the same thing, so you can see the individual one, but the all apps plan, that's going to give you over 20 different apps. So you're going to get print design apps, web design apps, video editing. So you get Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, Premiere Pro, After Effects, Adobe XD, you get all that sort of stuff. So once you get, if you're going to get like really Photoshop, which actually can start at $10 a month, but even like if you do Photoshop for 10, Illustrator and InDesign for 21 each, you're basically at the all apps plan. So you may as well just get the all apps plan at that point. Now, if you're working with an editor and they want to get into this workflow, a lot of times editors use a companion program called InCopy. And if all they need is InCopy, InCopy is actually cheaper. They can just get this kind of scaled down version of InDesign for just $5 a month. So editors that want to contribute into a InDesign InCopy workflow, they can just get InCopy. So that's a companion program that goes with it. So that way, let's say a designer will lay out a book or magazine or whatever it is in InDesign, and then they can allow the content, the text content, to be edited by InCopy users, and editors can go in using InCopy to edit the content in an InDesign file. All right, so let's take a look at InDesign and get started using it. In the app here, I can create a new document by clicking Create New or File New, and I'm going to create a new document this way. I should mention that I'm using InDesign 2021 here, but these fundamental things that we're going to be showing tonight they've been around for many years in InDesign, and I would expect they continue to be true for many more years from now. So I'm not going to be focusing on things that are new in a specific version. These are fundamental core things that have been around for a long time and should be timeless, even if you're watching this recording in the future. So when you first create a document, there are print documents, web documents, and mobile. So these kind of things would almost make you to think that you could do web stuff and maybe app design or something in here. Technically speaking, you could. It's just InDesign is not focused on that. I know they say web. I wish they'd almost more say digital. InDesign just doesn't integrate with web design workflows or like mobile app design, like other apps would do. So for example, if you're going to get into websites or apps, Adobe XD would be much better for that. Adobe XD was specifically created for doing digital design, app design, web design, or any sort of digital experience. So I know there's this side to it, but that's not really something that people are professionally using a lot. Sometimes people that only know InDesign will do stuff there, but your developers are not going to be very happy with you if you try to design in InDesign and then have a web developer or an app developer try to recreate your InDesign layout. It's not going to be as easy for them. So I highly suggest focusing on InDesign as being a print design program, not thinking of it as a digital design program. If you want to get into web, if you want to get into app design, those kind of digital designs, learn a proper digital design program like Adobe XD. That will do much better for you and integrate with developers. It's easier to show clients work, do user testing. So focus on InDesign as being primarily a print design program, even though there are those other areas that technically speaking it can do. So that's going to be my approach tonight, is showing you how to think of InDesign as a print design program. So being a print design program, when you first open it up, it's defaulting to picas, which is a typographic form of measurement, which you may never heard of before if you're not used to doing print design, if you're not used to typography. So you can switch to other types of measurements like inches if you're in the United States. If you're in other parts of the world and you use things like centimeters and millimeters, you can also choose those as well if you're more familiar with those. But InDesign does default to picas because points and picas relate to each other, and we measure our typography in points. And so points and picas are related. They're both a typographic form of measurement, but you don't have to use those. So I'm going to switch over to inches, which more people are probably familiar with. So when you first get started, you can switch over to that. I do actually like using picas, but I don't want to confuse anybody if you're not used to using those. There are some presets in here. If you open this up, you can choose some variety of presets. Like if you're in the US, you've got your letter size page, your legal, and your tabloid. If you're in Europe and overseas, they have other different sizes, which you're more likely going to be in centimeters or millimeters if you're doing those things. But I'm going to stick with a letter size page, which is in inches, because I'm in the US here. Noble Desktop is based in New York City, although we do teach classes live online as well. So anybody can join our classes from anywhere in the world, but we do give them in Eastern time. So I can choose my page size from a preset, or I can enter in any custom size that I want. So if I want to make this a 5 by 7, I can certainly do that. And if you want to see what you're doing behind the scenes, you can actually check on preview, and behind the scenes, it will actually create your document. So you can see exactly what that's looking like. So if I make this only 3 inches wide, make a tall, skinny kind of thing, I can do that. If I make this 7 by 7 and make it square, we can also see that that is now a square document as well. So that's checking on the preview down here at the bottom. But I will just stick with the 8.5 by 11 preset here. So I will choose that using inches. For right now, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to keep a single page document. I'm not going to do something like facing pages. Facing pages is when you're doing a book or a magazine, and you're going to have something on the left and the right hand side of a spread. So I'm going to keep this as a single page to keep it simple, just one page all by itself there. And I'm also going to keep it as one column. You can do multiple columns if you want to, but I'm going to keep it simple as it's just one column. And margins are the space all the way around the page. So if you want to adjust your margin area here, and why is my preview not updating here? Yeah, that preview should be updating here. Why is that not working? Let me hit create. Yeah, it's not working here. Let me create that again here. Oh, there we go. That's working better. Okay, now it's updating. Okay. Yeah, I was going to say when I was doing those multiple columns, that wasn't showing up the way it was supposed to. All right, yeah, I'm just going to keep it as a single column for right now. The margin guides are these guides all the way around the page here. As I adjust those, you'll see those changing. Margin guides you don't have to have. You can get rid of those if you want. But the goal of margin guides is to keep yourself a certain distance away from the edge of the document. They don't affect printing or anything. Let me do 1-inch margins all the way around. But they are a guide for you so that you don't get too close to the edge. You might want a visual buffer of space all the way around the page. Maybe your text content comes into a certain place here in the margin area, and you just don't want your text to be too close to the edge. So they're just a visual guide for yourself. They don't print, they don't affect printing. They are purely just a part of your design so that you can help yourself stay an equal distance all the way around your page if you want. If the link is checked, then when you adjust one, they all change, but they don't all have to be the same. If you want to unlink those, you can. And then you can make, let's say, more at the top and more at the bottom if you want. And then you can adjust, all the sides differently. But if that link is checked, then all sides are going to be the same. These can be changed later on. So if you do click create and you've made your document, later on you can go into your layout menus and go to margins and columns. And this is going to let you change the margins and columns later on. So it's not like you're setting this in stone. You can always come back in and make changes later on. So let me just close that and recreate my document again. Create new. All right. And I will again choose my inches here. So I got my 8.5 by 11, one column. Let's do just an even 1-inch margin all the way around. And then down below, so I'll scroll down here. Don't miss those other settings down below here. Bleed guides. So we're going to create an advertisement for our first example here. Now this could be, it could be a brochure, it could be a poster, it could be any sort of thing that you want to create, but we're going to create like a single page ad with primarily a big photo behind the scenes and like a headline and maybe a logo. So we'll have some text and some images, but we want this photo to go across the entire page. And because this photo is going to go all the way across the page, we need to include some bleed. And the standard bleed, at least in the US, is 1/8 of an inch. And do verify with your printer when you're sending this. And I'm assuming that this printing is professionally being professionally printed. So you're sending this to either, let's say you're going to send this to a magazine, which is going to be printed, or it's going to be part of a book, but professional printing. Now, can you print this at your local print shop? Of course you can. You can print this on your local printer. If you got an inkjet printer or color laser printer, you can print it yourself. But when you're setting up things like bleed, the way that this is going to work is when you send this to a commercial printer, let's say it's going to be part of a magazine. So let's say this is an ad, it's going to be on a certain page of a magazine somewhere, and we've purchased that ad space, and this is going to be sent to a magazine to be printed, and they're going to handle the printing of it. We need to make sure that our photograph goes not just to the edge, but extends a little bit beyond, because when that magazine or a book or whatever it is going to be printed, the printers can't print directly to the edge of a page. They need some little pull area on the sheet of paper. So we need to print a little beyond the size of the page, and it needs to be trimmed down. So they're going to have to cut down the sheet of paper. So they're actually going to print on a larger sheet of paper, and they're going to cut it down. And this goes for business cards or anything that needs to go all the way to the edge. Because if you print right to the edge and then you try to cut it down, you're going to move a little teeny bit potentially. You think about all those pages that make up a magazine. When they stack them all together, they're not going to stack them up exactly perfectly. So if they trim them all off at the same place, some of them are going to be in a little bit, some are going to be out a little bit. So there might be a sliver of white here of just the piece of paper that's showing through. We don't want that. So we need to give a little buffer zone for them to trim somewhere close. They're going to be close to where we want, but they might move a little bit. They might move in or they might move out. So we need to give them a little bit of bleed. It's going to bleed off the edge. And typically this costs more when you print with a bleed because they have to print on a larger sheet of paper and then trim it down. Now, if you're not going to bleed off the edge, your printing might be able to be cheaper because you're not paying for that maybe extra sheet and that extra trimming, that there's some waste involved in that. So it's possible, depending on the kind of printing, that you might be able to save some money if you're not choosing to bleed. And that's why actually a lot of books choose not to bleed, so that they can save some printing costs. So do check with your printer as far as their recommended bleed size. If you're not sure, 1/8 of an inch is a standard bleed for most projects. So you can type that in as 1/8, and assuming that you are in inches, which I am right now, it'll do the math for you to figure out that 1/8 inch. And so bleed guides are the red guides, because when you bleed, it's red, so they're color accurate with their guides. And so let me just hit, I'm not going to worry about slug guides. Those are not something that everybody uses. So I'm just going to skip those for now and just hit create. So we've got our document here. The white is the white of the paper, so that's the printable area. You assume that anything going off of that into the bleed area will most likely be trimmed off. Granted, it might move a little teeny bit, but that's the approximate trimmed down edge is the white sheet of paper. All right, so I want to get started putting things here into my page, bringing in photos, text, that sort of stuff. But we're now starting to see the interface here, so we need to look at a couple things about the interface. Over here on the left, we see tools. So we see things like a rectangle frame tool, where I can come out and draw out a box. I see a type tool, so I can drag out a type box, type in some text. This is some text, very small, very hard to read right now, but I can see that text. So we've got our various tools over here on the left. And once we choose a tool, we're kind of in that tool until we're done with that tool. So as I start to draw a box, we're going to keep making text boxes until we are all done with that tool. So whenever you're done with a tool, you have to switch to another tool. So you're always going to remain in that tool until you're finished. If you're used to other non-Adobe apps like Microsoft Office or other things, they're not tool oriented. So this is a new concept that is across all the Adobe apps. You'll notice that they are all tool-based programs. Now, once you have something selected, over here on the right, you see a properties panel. And Adobe's moving towards this properties panel for all of their apps. There's a properties panel in InDesign, Photoshop, Illustrator. It's actually Adobe XD is one of the earlier programs that kind of started this. And so they are moving towards this, but it does take up a lot of screen space. There are a lot of different options that are there, but one of the things that I like about InDesign is that they have this control panel, which has been around since the early versions of InDesign, and I think it's much more efficient in terms of its screen space. So under Window, you can hide and show various panels. These panels will appear mostly on the right-hand side, with the exception of this control panel. This control panel here, this one actually shows up here at the top. And I really like this control panel because it shows a lot of options in a very small amount of space. So for example, when I select some text using my type tool, I'm going to see a bunch of different type options, and it does not take up a lot of screen space. That's going to leave me have the right-hand side available for other things that I want to show, and this does not take up too much space on my screen. So I really like the control panel. There's actually all of these panels that you see on the right-hand side, the control panel, all of these together as an interface are something called the workspace. So the workspace is a collection of various panels that you hide and show. These panels are how you find options of things that you can do within the program. And so they put them all together as something called a workspace. The default Essentials workspace is very minimal. So they only show you the tool panel on the left and properties panel and just two other panels over here. I actually prefer the advanced workspace. This does not make InDesign harder to use, so don't feel like you have to be an advanced user to choose it. But when you choose the advanced workspace, and I played around with the advanced workspace because I often use this workspace, so I'm going to go in and reset this workspace just so it looks clean, like the first time you'd be choosing this workspace. So this is how you'd first see InDesign if you just started using it and you chose the advanced workspace. So with the advanced workspace, you get the control panel up here at the top, and you get a variety of different panels over here at the right. There's a lot more panels over here, things that you're going to want to use, in my opinion, quick, easy access to those things. And I think that's a better workspace than the essential one, the default one that you start off with. So I would highly recommend using this advanced workspace. Just know that if you ever do mess up or kind of dirty up your interface, like you pull panels out, you start to close them, if you mess anything up, you can always go in and reset your interface by going into Window, Workspace, and whichever workspace you're in, you can choose to reset that particular workspace, and it'll put it back and clean everything back up. So it's as though you first launched the program, all your interface is back where it belongs. And that's true of all the Adobe apps, that you can go in there and choose your workspace and reset your workspace. So now we have the tools on the left and this control panel up here at the top. I know it's not labeled control, but that's the name of it, is the control panel. That's going to show various controls for what we have selected. So if I'm using my selection tool and I click on something, I'm going to see the width and the height, the position. So X is from the left, Y is from the top. So it's how far down it is. You will, if you have the type tool selected, you will see type options. So you're going to see the font, the size. So you can go in there and change the styling of the text. You could do things like centering the text and right aligning the text. So the control panel will update with the appropriate controls for whatever you have selected. And it's pretty much like the properties panel, but I like it because it takes up less screen space, in my opinion. I think it's a little bit nicer. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this and delete these things here, and let's start getting into some of these tools. So if I want to bring in a photograph, I can use a rectangle tool over here. So I can go choose the tool and then drag out a rectangle. Now, InDesign is a frame-based tool. They call them frames. You could call them a box if you want. A frame is a box. It's frame oriented in the sense that you draw a frame and then you can put something into that frame. Do you want to put text in there? Do you want to put images in there? But you need a frame to have content. The selection tool lets you move these frames around. It lets you resize these. You can hit delete on your keyboard if you want to delete those frames. Now, those frames that you can create, those are generic frames. You can put whatever you want in them. But if you know you want type, you can go right to the type tool. And with the type tool, you can drag a box, drag out a frame, and then put some text in there. This is some text. If you use something like a rectangle frame tool, you have to draw the frame, and then you're still going to have to go to the type tool and then click into that text box to make it a text box. So I would say it's easier just to go right to the type tool than having to switch back and forth. So the type tool does double duty. It does multiple things. It does creating of the boxes. So I can drag out a box to make some type, and this is some type. And it also edits the text that's inside. So you can highlight the text, you can make it bigger and change the font and so forth. But if you are in an area that does not currently have a box, you can drag to create a box. I emphasize the dragging part. You cannot just merely click and start typing. For example, if I go to my type tool and I just click, nothing happens. Now, you can do that in some programs, in other programs, but not in InDesign. So for example, Photoshop will let you do that. Illustrator will let you do that. But InDesign, it requires you to drag out a box to start to put content there, because you have to have a box for InDesign to have content. All right, so that's important there. All right, so I'm going to delete those. So notice I'm choosing my selection tool to delete those. I want to bring in a photo. So I could just bring the photo in directly and let InDesign make that box for me, or I can choose to make the box ahead of time. So let's do that. I'm going to use my rectangle frame tool, and I'm going to drag out a box where I want to put that photo. And I'm going to then import something into there. So the importing feature is called place. You're going to place in a file. So I do file, place, and then I go to where I want this to be. So I'm going to go to my desktop where I have some files that I can demonstrate with. And I'm going to come back to this Australia ad that I'm going to be creating. But for right now, I'm going to bring in one of these pieces of art. So let's say I grab this here and it imports. Okay, so it brought in that image that I have. So let me use my selection tool here and now make that box bigger. So notice that we weren't seeing all of that piece of art. It was cropping off some of it. So if the box is not big enough, the art will be cropped off. So we can crop further the art and only show one portion of that. But we can also scale that art down to fit into that area. So if I go to, let's say I go to Object and I go to Fitting. So these are my fitting options. I can fill that frame that I drew. So this is why we call them frames, boxes, frames, whatever you want to call them. And I choose to fill that frame. It fills the entire space. Now the whole space of my box, right? Because I made a box. So let's say I make this a very tall box. When I say to fill that frame, it fills that whole frame as much as it can with the photo. But the photo does not match the aspect ratio of my box. So some of that photo is going to be cropped off. If I choose to do a fitting, so if I say fit, when you fit, it fits it into that space and it shows you the entire image. There might be empty areas of the box. It's not filling the whole thing. It had to fit it entirely inside of that, but at least I'm seeing the entire piece of art. So it just depends. Do you want to see the whole piece of art, or do you want it to cover, to fill that whole frame? And so it just depends on which one you want to do. Once you have that box created, if later you resize the box, the photo that's inside of it does not change unless we want it to scale. I'll show you how to do that in just a second. So you can always go back in and say, let's fit it or fill it again. So if I choose fill, that fills out the whole space. Now there's this idea of the box and the content in the box. So when you're resizing the box. Now, if you click and hold for a moment before you drag, you're going to get this nice little overlay. So if you're impatient and you drag very quickly, you don't get that nice little overlay showing you the cropped off areas of your image. If you click and hold for a moment, and before you start to drag, you just pause for just a moment. You don't have to pause for very long. Just click and hold and then start to drag, then you'll get that nice overlay. That overlay shows you all the parts of the photo that you're cropping off, so you actually see what's outside of your box. So click and drag quickly, no nice little overlay. Click and hold for just a second before dragging, you get that nice overlay. Now, if you don't like waiting for that overlay to help you crop your photos, you can actually change that. To get to your preferences on the Mac, you go to InDesign Preferences. On Windows, this would be Edit Preferences. But here I am in InDesign Preferences. And then once you get to Preferences, on Windows, when you go to Edit, and Preferences will be down towards the bottom. Once you get to Preferences, it'll look just like my InDesign Preferences here on the Mac. And that would be set under General or Interface. I forget which one. Interface. Yeah, here it is. That's called live screen drawing. The delay means you have to wait for a moment. To be honest, I just like it to be immediate. Why wait? Just make it immediate. And that way, as soon as you start to work, you'll get that nice overlay. And so then now I don't have to click and wait. I don't have to click and pause. I just drag and I get that immediate live screen drawing. So that's a good preference in my opinion to set. All right. So I've got this box and I've got this photo in the box. As I resize the corners, I am cropping the photo. But what if I want to move the photo inside that box? When you hover over, you're going to get this little circle. This looks kind of like a donut. Officially, it's called the content grabber. If you look under the view menu, under extras, this thing is called the content grabber. So if for some reason you don't see the content grabber, you might have hidden it in the past. But it should be shown by default, so you should not have to go in and show it. It should be shown by default, but officially it's called the content grabber. So that content grabber, that little circular donut there, that allows you to grab the content and move it around within the box. So if you grab anywhere else other than the content grabber, then you're going to move the picture and the box together. So this is important. A lot of people look for something to grab to move a photograph. And if you grab the handle, you're moving the photo without moving the box that it's sitting in. So you're changing the cropping of it. If you grab anywhere else, you'll move the entire thing. So drag anywhere but the content grabber to move it as a group. Because think of it as there's a box with a photo in the box. You kind of have two things, the box and the photo. So grab anywhere, you get the photo and the box. Grab just the photo with the content grabber, you're just moving the photo, not moving the box. Also, when you first click, you'll get blue handles, which indicate that you're on a layer and that the object is selected. If you click on the content grabber, you're going to get brown handles. Now those brown handles, those are content handles. And it actually shows you how big the content is. So I know that I'm cropping off just a little bit on the right and the bottom, but quite a bit on the top and the left. I can grab that handle and I can actually start to scale the photo in particular, so I can choose how big I want that to be. Now notice as I'm scaling this that I'm scaling it unproportionally. Make sure as you're scaling that you hold Shift. Shift will scale proportionally. If you do not hold Shift, you will scale unproportionally. So make sure you hold Shift as you're scaling, and that way you will not distort your photograph. Now, should you accidentally distort your photograph, you will see up here, you'll see two percentages. This is your scale X and scale Y. X is horizontal, Y is vertical. If you can't remember X and Y, just think of Y as an arrow pointing down. So Y's point down, they're vertical. X is the opposite. So if they are different, you know that you've distorted the photo. If you update one of them, because the link is checked, updating one changes the other one automatically. So just click on one of those arrows and they get to be the same. So if you've distorted it, they'll be different. Just click an arrow and really quickly they'll become the same, and you know that that's proportional again. The only time you'd stay unproportional is if, let's say, you drag it this way and you just leave it that way. And also if you uncheck that as you adjust these numbers, then they're going to stay unproportional because you unlinked them. But as long as you link those together, when you update one, they're automatically going to link together, so you're proportional. And just make sure you hold Shift as you drag to stay in proportion so you don't distort your photographs. When you go to select this, if you click on the box, like the area that's not the content grabber, then if you hit delete, you'll delete the box and the photo inside. If I undo that and I click on the content grabber, when you click on the content grabber, you grabbed the content. So when you hit delete now, you're going to delete the content in the box, but the box is still there. You could place a different photograph in the box. So there's always this idea of the box with stuff inside the box. Now I can undo that, of course, here to bring that back. In InDesign, you have unlimited undos, so you can keep going back to undo, 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 Command Z on the Mac or Control Z on Windows. So you have unlimited undos over everything in the program. All right, so I'm going to click on this, hit delete to delete the box and the photo that's inside. So while I can draw a box ahead of time, another way to bring an image in is not to draw the box first. First, what we could do is just have nothing selected and go right to File Place. When you go to File Place with no box selected, InDesign is going to offer to make a box for you. So I can choose the photo and it says, oh, okay, where do you want to place that? So it puts it in my cursor, awaiting for me to do either a click or a drag. If I click, it brings it in at the size it was made. So if it's a big photo, it's going to come in huge. If it's a small photo, it'll come in small. Let me undo that. So that was clicking. Instead of clicking, I could also drag. So if I want to fill out a specific amount of space, I could drag and I could make that either small or I could make it big. Just be careful of the percentage on your tooltip. You don't want to go bigger than the original. So 100% is the size that this was made at. Less than 100% is reducing it down. Bigger than 100% is enlarging it. When you're bringing in pixel-based graphics, you want to make sure that you don't enlarge things much bigger than what they started with, because that's going to lower the quality. So I'll talk more about resolution in just a little bit, but for right now, just be careful about making something too big. I'll come back and discuss that more in just a little bit. I'm going to hit delete to delete that. Now, in this case, this is an ad. I know I want it to be a full edge-to-edge photo, so I know right now how much area I want to fill. I don't know what the aspect ratio of my original image is. I don't really care because I know I want to fill the entire page with photo. So for me, it's going to be better to just make my box ahead of time. So I'm going to use my rectangle frame tool. I'm going to drag a box from the edge of the bleed guide to the other edge of the bleed guide to cover over the entire page, plus filling out the bleed area. With that photo box selected, or I should say with the box, it's not really a photo box, it's just a box. You can place anything you want. You can place text in there, you can place photos, you can place anything. It's just a box. Boxes can have anything you want in them. But with that box selected, I'm going to place in my photo. Now, I'm going to go into my other folder here, and I'm going to choose this. You can bring in pretty much any kind of graphic that you want, but you do want to bring in high quality original art. You don't want to bring in some low res web graphic, like an over compressed JPEG that looks bad. You want to make sure you bring in high quality originals. These could be very high quality JPEGs that were saved with very good quality. When you download stock imagery online, those kind of JPEGs are high quality JPEGs, high resolution and high quality. Those are different than, let's say, a JPEG put on a website as part of a graphic in a web page, which is probably a smaller, lower resolution JPEG. You can bring in TIFF files, Photoshop files, PNG files. So pretty much any kind of pixel-based format you can bring in, but just make sure you bring in something that is good quality and high resolution. Again, we'll talk about resolution in just a moment. So I'm going to hit open, and that brings it in. Now, when I was making this, I prepped that image to be the correct size, so it actually came in at the size I wanted it to be. Not because it fit automatically into the box, it didn't do that. If I make this smaller here and click on the content grabber to hit delete, if I bring it in at this size, you'll see. Let's place this in again. And oops, wrong thing there. I didn't want to bring that in. Undo. And instead, let's go back to place. I have to click on this one. There you go. So notice that now it's cropping off part of that photograph. So we made the photo to be the size of this page because we knew that that's the size we wanted to make it. So I'm going to make this bigger, cover over the whole thing, and there we've got our photograph. So in this case, I don't have additional photograph to crop off because we already sized it and cropped it and made everything perfect for this particular ad, but you don't have to do that. As long as you're bringing something that has enough resolution, you can crop off the excess that you don't need. Now, making sure that our images are proper resolution. Let's do that. There is an info panel under Window. I can open up the info panel. It's not one of the panels that's normally shown over here on the right, so I have to open that up separately. So I find that under Window. I go to Info, and in here we see the information about resolution. We see actual PPI. This is what the file is set up as, and then effective PPI. PPI is pixels per inch. A lot of people will say dots per inch when they're referring to the printed page, but in digital we talk about pixels per inch, and that's what's in the file itself. So with print, the goal is to create, we want 300 pixels per inch. Now, technically, we could be a little bit less, but the goal, the ideal, is 300 pixels per inch when we're talking about professional quality printing. Books, magazines, business cards, letterheads, those kind of things. Ideally, we're trying to go for 300. You can get down lower, like probably 250, 250 and above, you're probably not going to notice any difference. But as you start to go lower and lower, 200, 150, 100, the lower you go, the worse it's going to look. Things are going to start to look pixelated, and at some point you're going to actually see the blocks that make up the image. So for example, if I use my zoom tool over here on my left and I zoom in on this, at first I won't see pixels, but eventually if I keep zooming in and zooming in and zooming in, I am going to see pixels. There are 300 pixels in every inch, so those pixels are quite small, but they do exist. If I only had, let's say, 100 pixels per inch, these pixels would be much bigger, and so it would be like 3 times the size, and it would be noticeable when you print this. So you want to make sure that you don't have low-res artwork, which is like 100 pixels per inch or 150 pixels per inch. The closer you are to 300, the better it's going to look. I'm going to go back and zoom out to fit the whole page in the window. So as far as zooming in goes, you can use your zoom tool. You can drag to the right or to the left to zoom in or out. So think of it as like kind of an on-screen scrubber. The thing that you go and click on is the thing you're going to zoom in towards. So you click on that and then you drag to the right to zoom in, drag to the left to zoom out. If you go to the water, for example, now I'm zooming in and out on the water. If I go to the tippy top point up here, I'm zooming in and out on that point up there. And when you want to see everything, you can say View, Fit Page in Window. If you have zoomed in on this, technically you can use your scroll bars over here and at the bottom to move around, but it's going to be easiest to use your hand tool. And you can drag around here and you can go in any direction. So the hand tool is a scrolling tool. You're just moving around your document, just like scrolling with your scroll bars, but you can move in any direction. It's much easier than using your scroll bars. There are keyboard shortcuts for doing that, and for the most part, these work in all the Adobe apps. For example, you can do Command plus and minus on the Mac or Control plus and minus on Windows. So Command plus and minus on Windows, Control plus and Control minus for zooming in and out. Fit page in window, you go to Command 0 to see the whole thing. And so let's go back here. All right, so effective pixels per inch. 300 is the goal. Actual is what's in the file. I don't really care what's in the file. You might start with something low res or start with something high res, and once you've scaled it, it changes the resolution. So all that really matters is effective pixels per inch. What is it going to output as? So think of actual as input and effective as output. How's it going to output? How's it going to print? That's all I care about. So for example, let's say I make this smaller. I'm going to say, let's fit this down. I'm going to fill the frame proportionally, and that ends up making this smaller. So now it's effectively 432, which is way more than I need. I don't need that. Now let's say I made this bigger. I'm going to click on the content grabber to select that content grabber, and I'm going to hold shift and make this bigger. So now I am making this photo bigger in this box. I'm holding shift as I'm doing this. You can drag in the box to move it around like so. Now it's only 221. So I started at 300, but now that I'm at 135%, remember that 100% is the original size that this image was built at. Now that I've gone beyond that size, I'm enlarging those pixels, making them bigger, making them more visible. And at some point, I'm going to keep lowering this resolution down and lowering it down. And now I'm down to 165%, or sorry, 165 pixels per inch at 182% scale. So if I go back to 100% scale, so if I go back to 100%, that's the original size. And actually, let's center that back in the box. Let's center that content so we can see it again. There we go. Now I'm back to 300 pixels per inch. So all I care about is effective pixels per inch and making sure that this is good enough quality to print. Okay, so let's go back now and have this cover over the whole thing. All right, cover over that from guide to guide. And now let's object, fitting, fill the whole frame proportionally. All right, that's good. All right, so we've got our photograph there. Before we get too far, I'm going to go ahead and save this as, this is my InDesign file that I'm saving here. And I'm going to save it here as my Australia ad. Dan's Australia ad. INDD is for InDesign document. So this is an InDesign document that I'm saving here. Save that. All right. Now, one important thing to note is that InDesign is linked to this file. We need to keep that original image file around. So the InDesign document is actually quite small. So let me go into my file that I just made here. The InDesign file itself is actually much smaller than my photo that I put in there. The photo is 20 megabytes. The ad that I did is just 1. So clearly this photograph is not sitting inside of that. You keep your files around, the graphics that you have imported, because all that you have inside the InDesign file is just a preview of that document. But whenever you're going to print or make a PDF, the InDesign file is going to need to reference the original graphic. So you need to keep all of your originals around. You are linked to them. It did not even give us the choice to embed the document. Technically, it's possible, but it's not the way that we normally work in InDesign. When you place them in, a link is built, and the InDesign file requires that to be around in the future. So keep those files around. Don't just go throwing those away. And that's actually so you can go in and make edits to them, because InDesign doesn't edit photos. It just places them there into a layout. So you can add things like type over top of them, but then you're going to go back to Photoshop or Illustrator to make changes on those things. You can actually see this link in the links panel. If I go to Window and I go to Links, we can see that we are linked to that file. If I hover over it, it tells us where that file is. I normally like to just close this part down here, but it does tell you more information down there. But I normally just like to make this a little bit bigger, resize the column here so I can see the name better. And when you hover over, it tells you where it is. So let's say I want to make a change to that. I would change that in Photoshop. I can hit the edit button, and that's going to go over to Photoshop. So here I'm in Photoshop, and I could make a change. So let's say I go in and add a curve adjustment or something to brighten this up. So let's say I brighten this up, or actually, yeah, let me brighten it up. And I'm going to brighten it up way too much, just so we can see that it did actually make a change. I'm going to go ahead and save the file, and that saves the changes. When I come back to InDesign, it's going to automatically update, so now I see the latest preview of this. If I hit edit again and go back, and let's say this time I darken it, and I save, when I come back to InDesign, again, it updates. So what would happen though if, let's say, you didn't click the edit button and maybe the file wasn't even open? So let me go ahead and save this file, close it up. So, somebody comes in and they make some edits to the graphic, maybe when you weren't looking. Maybe you're responsible for the layout and you have a photo retoucher doing the retouching for you. So they go back and they put it back and they make it look good, and everything's good, but that's now a different version than you had in your layout. So when you first open up the layout, it's going to say, hey, let me just check through all your links, and you're not missing any. Like, they didn't go missing. It still knows where they are, but one of them has been modified. So if you hit update, then it's going to go and update the preview, and now you're seeing the latest thing. If you don't update that preview, let me close this file without saving changes here. So let's say you don't update. Why would you not want to? Maybe you want to go and see what somebody did. Maybe you don't know what they did. Like, do you need to change the cropping or something? So in this case, this is the old preview. It's not up to date. There's a yellow exclamation mark that says this has been modified since you last brought it in. You can double click on that to update. So now if I double click, it updates and I get to see in front of me what actually changed on that image. So if they had done some retouching, if they had added an element, removed an element, maybe I need to change my cropping. It can be nice to see what you're doing instead of hitting update when you first open the file and just hoping for the best. It's nice to be able to see it and preview it while you're doing this. All right. Also, speaking of the preview that's here, when you are looking at this, by default, InDesign uses a high quality display. Now, high quality display references the original image, so you need access to that image for high quality display to work. You can drop down to a typical display, which is going to be a more pixelated display, but it does work a lot faster. So when I'm in high quality display, it does need to reference that file. And if you're dealing with a lot of graphics, or sometimes people are working remotely and they're dealing with slow internet connections, and maybe they're working off of a remote server and it's slow to read all of those files. If InDesign is being slow because of these big high-res images, you can drop down to a typical display and you'll be able to work faster. So the default is the high quality display, but you can drop down to typical to work faster. And this is actually the only preview that's actually built into the file. So if for some reason you lost access to that original graphic, this is all that InDesign could print. It couldn't print the actual original, which is a much higher quality. Built into InDesign is just a low-res preview. That's how they keep the InDesign files so small. All right. But InDesign does default to that high quality display. It looks great, but if InDesign gets slow, consider dropping down to a typical display. All right. Okay, so let me bring in another graphic here, a vector graphic. So I'm going to draw a box, another rectangle frame. Let's drag that out and place in. Now, okay, so I just realized that. Let's say I'm drawing a box here. I have no idea how big that box should be. Let's not do that. Let's just place it in. So I'm going to bring in a logo. I don't know what the aspect ratio is. I don't even know how big the logo is. I just want to place it. So I'm not going to make a box. I'm going to let InDesign make my box for me. I'm going to go to File, Place, and I'm going to choose the logo that I have already made. We've got a color version and a white version. So I'm going to place in this AI file is an Adobe Illustrator file. So I'm going to place in that Adobe Illustrator file. And if I click, it brings it in at the original size. If, let's say I undo that, if I drag, I can make this any size that I want. Now, because this is an Illustrator file, a vector graphic, vector graphics are different than pixel-based graphics. Vector-based graphics are crisp and clean, and they don't have pixels. So no matter how far I zoom in, I'm never going to see pixels in a vector graphic. So I don't need to worry about resolution with a vector graphic. In fact, if I look in my info panel that I looked at earlier, there will be no resolution on a vector-based graphic. If I choose my pixel-based graphic, why are you not showing up, info, there? You should be showing up there. Info. There we go. So here we have our resolution because I'm selecting a pixel-based graphic. But on the vector-based graphic, it's just blank. So vector-based graphics, you don't have to worry. So with vector-based graphics, you can make that much bigger than the original 100%. You can make it any size you want. You only have to be careful about the sizing of pixel-based graphics. But things from Illustrator, you can place those in and you can make them any size you want. Now, as you're sizing these things, instead of having to drag your box a certain size and then having to fit into that, which could be tedious, you can size these things after you bring them in. And the way that you do that is by holding Command-Shift on the Mac or Control-Shift on Windows. So Command on the Mac or Control on Windows is for scaling. So as I drag, if I don't hold anything down, I'm cropping. But if I hold Command on the Mac or Control on Windows, then I'm scaling. I add the Shift key to scale proportionally. So that's why it's Command-Shift as in scale proportionally, or on Windows, Control-Shift as in scale proportionally. And that's going to allow me size. And that works on any content, whether it's text, images, whatever it is, any group of things, you can select and hold that Command-Shift or on Windows Control-Shift to scale. Now, in this case, this color logo isn't looking very good on this background. It's hard to read, so I really want to swap it out for the white one, which is exactly the same size. I just want to swap it out. In a box, you can only have one piece of content, either text or a single image. So if I want to swap this out, all I have to do is go back to File, Place, and it will replace the one that I have in there with the new graphic. Now that new graphic could be entirely different, or in this case, they're basically the same. There's just a white version versus a color version. So whenever I replace it, it's updating it to be the new image. In fact, if I look at my links panel now, you can see that there are two graphics in there. If I go to Place, which will replace it with the other file, you can see how it swapped it out. And so there's the color one. And if I go back in and replace in with the white one, then now it's the white one. And like we did with the Photoshop file, when you hit the edit button, if it's an Illustrator file, it'll go over to Illustrator and you can make a change. Now here it's a little hard to see the white on the white background, but I can zoom in a little closer here. And let's say I want to grab this part right here and I want to change that color to be, let's say, orange. When I'm done, I go to File, Save, and then I go back to InDesign and it updates. So same workflow. If you want to update a graphic, it doesn't matter what the original graphic is, but if it's Illustrator, it's going to go to Illustrator. If it's Photoshop, it's going to go to Photoshop. So you can make those changes. And now I can actually hop back over to Illustrator. I don't really want to make that change, so I'm going to undo. Save my file again. I can actually close it, come back. Now, if it doesn't automatically update because you didn't click edit, see that last time I didn't click edit. First of all, notice the preview went really bad. That's because this is now the old embedded preview. It's not the most current one pulling directly from the image because this is the old preview. It needs to be updated. So if I double click, that will update that. And now it's actually referencing the file once again. Now, if I drop down into typical display, it's still going to look bad in typical display. Typical display is just the embedded preview. It's not a high-res, beautiful preview, but it's quick as you're zooming in and out. You know, it's a quick preview. So if InDesign is ever acting slowly, the typical display is going to be really fast. High quality will be slower, but of course a lot better. So if something looks bad at high quality, then you know it's actually bad, or it could be that the link just needs updating. Also, if anything ever goes missing, like let's say you go in and you rename a file. So let's say I go to my desktop here and I just rename this. Instead of white, I just call it the logo. You know, and now it's a different name. Well, InDesign is basing its link off of a name. So here, this image is missing. It says, hey, I don't know where that is. It'll put that little icon there on the image in your layout. It'll also tell you here. And if you ever open up a file, so let's say I save that. So I just hit a Command S, or on Windows Control S to save. Whenever you open a file, the first thing it'll do is it'll see, have any links been updated or have any gone missing? So it checks all your links as soon as you open up a file and says, hey, this document contains a link to a source that is missing. You can find or relink the missing link using the links panel. So, okay. So here's the links panel. It actually opens it up for us. And if it's missing, that's different than modified. When you double click, it's going to have to say, hey, please tell me where that went. You know, this used to be called Australia.com logo white, and it's not called that anymore. So please, did you just put it somewhere else? Did you rename it? Let me know where it went. And in this case, we renamed it, so we got to point it to the new file. And then it's happy again. It's fine. It could be just that you moved it and you just had to tell it where you moved it. So whether you move it, rename it, ideally try to keep your project organized. I like to have a folder with all my stuff in it and keep all of my graphics around, my InDesign layout. So I like to keep everything in one folder. Let me save this and close it. To make it easier to manage your projects, in the beginning of the file name on a Mac, I like to put a space. That just keeps your layout at the top, and then it keeps all of your other assets down below. You can't add a space at the beginning of a Windows file name. So if you're dealing with Windows, if you're either on Windows or you deal with people that are on Windows, try an exclamation mark, and an exclamation mark will start your layout at the top of the folder as well. I just like to keep my InDesign layout at the top so it's quick and easy to find when I first come into a project. So that way, when I open up a folder, in my folder, I've got my InDesign layout right up here at the top, and then I've got all my graphics down below. That just makes it quick and easy to double click on the first file, and you're in working on your document. All right. So that is the graphics side of InDesign, bringing in your graphics, placing them there. And now we need to bring in some text. So I'm going to grab my type tool, and I can drag out a text box here. And wherever you put that text box, you'll now be able to put text. You can type out the text directly. You can copy and paste text in if you want, but you can also import text or place it in. Placing is importing anything, text, photos, graphics, whatever it is. That's your import option. So I'm going to place, and I will place in this case, it's a plain text file, so there's no formatting that comes through, but it could be a Word document. It can be an Excel file if you want to bring in tables. So it can't bring in just any kind of file, but it can bring in plain text files, rich text files, Word documents, or Excel files. Those are the files that you can bring in. In this case, it's plain text, so it just comes in. No formatting or anything. It's going to be up to me to do the formatting. I'm going to hit Command plus to zoom in a few times. On Windows, that would be Control plus. And now I can start to design this. I might want this to be in different boxes so I can move it around separately. For example, here's a main headline, and then here's some other stuff that maybe goes down here with the logo. So if I want to break it up into two boxes so I can move them separately, I can take some text in one box, and I can cut it, and then I can come create another box somewhere else and paste it into that box. So you can move text between your boxes, and then you can use your selection tool to move those around independently of each other. Both of these want to be white, so I'm going to click on one, hold Shift, click on the other. So now both of them are selected. I'm doing that with my selection tool to select the boxes. And then to give it a color, I can go to my swatches panel. This is where you can deal with your color swatches that you've already made. And there's multiple things we can do to apply color. We can apply color to the container. So for example, if I put a white container color, I have a white box with black text inside of it. That's not what I want. So I'm going to say none. So there's the container, and then there's the text in the container. So what do you want to do? So if you're doing it affects the text, when you choose text, now you can fill the text with a color. And so when you're doing this, you have to be careful of a couple things. First of all is which of these is selected, container or text. So let's say container is selected. Then you also need to be concerned with fill or stroke. So if I choose fill, that's a black fill, a blue fill, whatever it is. But then there's also the stroke, that's the outline. So if I put a white outline on this, and then I make it thicker just so you can really see. So this is your border or stroke, as it's called. And so that's the color of that border. So you can do different colored borders. And so whichever icon is in front, that's the color, that's the thing you're going to apply your color to. So if stroke's in front, I can say none. If my fill's in front, I could say none. You could do that here in the swatches panel, or you can also go up here as well. Fill and stroke, those are two separate things. So you can go into the fill and say, let's fill it with white. Let's stroke it with pink. So you can do it in either place. It's the same thing, just two different places to put it in. Then if I choose text, when I'm doing text, again, I have the fill of the type, but then I also have the outline. So red slash, that means none. But this icon here, that's the stroke. If I put, for example, a red stroke that literally outlines the text in red, which is not the look that I'm going for here. So before you just go click on a color, first, is it the container or is it the text inside the container? And then, is it fill or stroke? Choose that first. Then you can click on the color to set the color. I'm going to choose paper because it shows through to the color of the paper, which essentially is white on normal paper. Now I can come back in and just select this particular box. And I'm going to use my type tool because I want to select this first line and make it different than the second line. This is a main heading here. And these panels over here on the right, if you click on the name, it opens up, and you click on the name again, it closes. These are like little pop-up panels on the right. So they're toggles. So you click on them to open and close those. So I want to make this bigger. So I can go here to my type size, make this bigger. You can use the arrows here to make them bigger and smaller, like so. And I'm gonna highlight all this stuff here, and then you can also let's make this like the size here. You can also change the leading here as well. Leading is the space between lines. The icons that you see here, when you hover over them, wait for a tooltip to appear, and then you'll see the name of the option. So this is font size, and this is leading. Not leading, leading, because it was strips of lead back in the day when we were dealing with metal type, back in the typesetting days. So they'd put strips of lead in between the lines. And so we can change the leading there, space between lines. Of course, we can change different fonts, and actually when you hover over here, let me put this over to the side. I'm going to use my hand tool to slide over here and then come back in with my type tool, and you can hover over and you can actually get a preview of how this looks as you're going through. So it actually shows you a preview here, and also as you hover over before I click, it shows you a preview there. So you can decide which one you want it to be. And so yeah. Which one? Now keep in mind that some of these might have different weights, so you can go to that arrow right there and you can choose different weights. So do you want a light one, which is thin? Do you want a bold one? Do you want a black one, which is even thicker and darker? So they'll just show you one of the family, but don't forget you can open up and see all the different weights and styles. So is it italic? Is it condensed, expanded? Lots of different versions of that. All right, so let's say you find the font that you want. So then you choose it. If there are different weights, they will appear in the second menu here if there are different weights. Like this one, this is more like a display kind of typeface. There's just one weight. But if you choose one of these that has a bunch of different weights, then you'll see all of those different weights here in this second menu. I'm going to undo to go back to this one right here, like so. All right, then I can go in here to this second line here. If you know of a particular font that you want to work with, let's say Helvetica. So I can start typing in Helvetic, and see it's already come up with all the Helvetica different weights. So I could choose the particular one that I want, and then I've gotten right to that font once you know a particular font. And then you can size it here. If you make something too big so it doesn't fit into the box anymore, you're going to get a red plus. So that red plus at the bottom right, that indicates that there is what's called overset text. Overset text means the text does not fit into that box. You need to make your box bigger, or somehow get that text to fit. So let me select these things and just move those down. So just keep that in mind, that if your box is too small, use your selection tool to make that box bigger, or otherwise you're going to have to get your content small enough to fit. Using my type tool, I can go back and select this here, and I can change the size. Might want to put some space above that paragraph. And in InDesign, you don't have to be coarse about your changes. Like you don't have to put in entire line breaks. You can be very fine-tuned, very controlled about your spacing. There are character options here and paragraph options here. In the character options, you see things that you can change character by character by character. Things like your font, your size, your color. But when it comes to paragraph level changes, you switch over here to paragraph options. And this is where you do things like centering, right aligning. Those are done to paragraphs. You can't center a word, for example. You can center the whole paragraph, but you can't center a word unless it's on its own line. So when it comes to paragraph options, like space before an entire paragraph, you can dial in exactly the amount of space that you want. So it could be very specific. InDesign is excellent with its typography controls. You can dial in exactly the spacing and the options and the sizes that you want with your type. So for example here, let's say I want to move this down below here, and I'm going to make this bigger because I'm probably going to adjust things. Like here they're hyphenating, some text here, and I don't want that to be hyphenated. So I'm going to go to my type tool to see my type options. And under the paragraph controls, there's a hyphenate option. I'm going to turn that off because that's fine in some cases, but this is a one single paragraph. I don't really want to hyphenate that. I'm not writing a book or a magazine here where that could be more useful with longer columns of text. So I'm going to uncheck hyphenate there. And then let's say I go to my character options here and I switch over to Helvetica. So I start typing in Helvetica, and I was doing Helvetica Noi here. So let's say I do like a regular version here with maybe a little bit smaller, maybe a little bit more line height here. By the way, when you see auto here, you're going to see parentheses. Parentheses mean an automatic setting. You can see what the automatic setting is. If it just said the word automatic, if it just said auto, you wouldn't know what auto was. So it says auto by the parentheses. So it's a way of saying auto without saying the word auto. But it does automatically adjust. As I change my size, the leading automatically changes. Now I can go in and dial in a specific amount, and now it's not an auto setting. Now as I change my size, the line height does not change. The leading does not change. So then I have to manage both size and leading here. I can resize my box using my selection tool and resize that and get that to be the way that I want and drag that into position. Guides will help you to line up with other elements. These are called smart guides. So they help you to line up with other things like so. Now let's say you want to help that logo maybe or the type pop off of its background a little bit more. You might want to do something like add a drop shadow. For those, you can go to your effects button up here in the control panel, and you can go to your drop shadow effect. So FX is for effects, including the drop shadow effect. Move this window over here and check on preview so I can see that. And there you go. You can change the angle on this. You can change the size, which is like your softness amount here. You can change the distance of how far away or how close to the text it is. You can change the opacity, which is like a darkness to that. So you can make it look how you want. And you could do that to text. You can also do it to graphics such as logos. So if I go and add a drop shadow to that, there we have a drop shadow there. And again, you can change the angle, the distance, the opacity, and the size, like so. It is live, so if you want to go back into drop shadow and edit anything, you can. If you don't like it, you can uncheck it, so you turn the drop shadow off if you don't like it. So those are all live things, and those would update, of course. So if you update the text, that shadow is going to update, of course. I'm going to zoom back out to show the whole page, so I'm going to do fit page and window. And let's say you want to see without all the margin guides and the box edges and without the bleed area, because technically the bleed area is going to be cut off. So I just want to get a kind of final preview of this. Down here at the bottom left of the toolbar, there is normal view, which is what we've been in this whole time, and there's also preview mode. So if I go into preview mode switches into a mode where all you see is the final preview of how it's going to print. So I can go back and forth between normal and preview mode. Notice in preview mode, the bleed is hidden, the box edges are hidden, the guides are hidden, all the non-printing stuff is hidden. When you mouse over that button, notice it says preview and in parentheses W. W as in preview. You can go in and out of preview mode by hitting the W key. So W goes in and out of preview. Just make sure that you are not typing in a piece of text because you'll get a bunch of W's. So don't be doing that. Just make sure you click outside so your cursor is not in any text, and then you can hit the W key to go in and out of preview mode. And so you could design in this mode if you want, and you don't have to be in that other mode. And that way you just don't see those other guides, and which can be a little bit distracting. And of course also you hide the bleed area. So this is the final trimmed down piece. It cuts off that little bit of extra bleed to show you what should the final thing look like when you're all done. All right, so let's say I'm all done with this. So I save my file. I've got text. I've got text that uses certain fonts. I've got images. I've got all this stuff. And let's say I'm going to give it to somebody else. If I give you the InDesign file, and the text is built into InDesign, I don't need to have my original text file. That's fine. I don't need that anymore. But I will need the logo and the photograph. I'll need to give you those. And also any fonts as well. So while I could just give you this folder, that does not include the fonts. And it's not all neatly organized. So maybe it'd be better if I just package this up and send it to you. So for that, we can go to File, Package, and I could package up all the files to send them to you. So if I do that, Package, this just gives you kind of an overview of all the stuff that you've done in the document. I could click Package, and this is going to tell you where you're going to save it. So let me just put this on my desktop. And I'll call this the Dan's Austria add folder. So it creates a nice little folder for you, which is nice. And what it's going to do is it's going to copy your fonts, everything except for Adobe fonts. Adobe fonts come from your Creative Cloud account, and anybody can get access to those Adobe fonts. So if you've used any Adobe fonts, ones that you've activated through your Creative Cloud, those fonts would be auto-activated when somebody else opens up the file. They'd actually see a dialog that would say, hey, this file uses some Adobe fonts. Do you want to activate them? And then it could auto-activate those for you. And it does not collect non-Adobe Chinese, Japanese, and Korean fonts. Now, I've never worked on Chinese, Japanese, and Korean projects, so that has never affected me. But if you are doing Chinese, Japanese, or Korean fonts, those are unique, kind of specialized fonts. It does not collect ones that are not made by Adobe. You can manually collect those, but it does not automatically collect those. You'd have to do it yourself. So it's going to copy your fonts, except those that Adobe can auto-activate for you. It'll copy all your linked graphics, and it's going to update those links in this package so that they point to themselves. They're not going to point to the original ones that were on your hard drive. So it basically makes a self-contained little package. Everything's good. IDML is something that by default is turned on. IDML files, this is not like an InDesign document. That's an INDD file, an InDesign document. IDML is InDesign markup language. This is, if you've ever heard of HTML, IDML is InDesign's markup language rather than hypertext markup language. This is a way to go back and forth between different versions of InDesign. So if I give you an IDML file, you can open that up in basically any version of InDesign, older or newer. Mainly, this is important for going older, because when you save an InDesign file, you can only save in your current version. So if I'm using InDesign 2021 and I save my file, only people with InDesign 2021 or later can open it. People with earlier versions cannot open that. If I give you an IDML file, however, anybody can open it, including people with older versions of InDesign. The only problem is if I'm packaging this up, most likely the reason I'm packaging this is to give it off to a printer. And if you include an IDML file, that does allow printers with older versions of InDesign to open it up. But if you don't know that they're converting it to an older version, the risk you run is if somebody opens this up with an old version, that old version will do the best job it can at trying to render that file. But if you've used some new feature that's only available in InDesign 2021, that old version of InDesign might not accurately render your document because it's not going to have a certain feature. And so it'll do the best it can, but that doesn't mean it's 100%. So whenever you're going back to older versions, I like to know that they need that file. I don't just like to include it for everybody unless it's intentional. I want to save it as my current version and know that they're opening it up in that current version and that it's going to be opened up accurately. If they are using an old version and they say, hey, I can't open up your InDesign file, I have an older version. When I send them the IDML, at least I know to check to see if anything changed. If I include both, I don't know. Are they using the same version? Are they using an old version? I don't know how diligently I have to check the files. So I don't just by default include IDML. Now, should I include a PDF? Let's come back and talk about PDFs in just a moment. Let's just package up the InDesign files and we'll come back and talk about PDFing, because PDFing is a good thing to do. If you're sending to a printer, a lot of times they'll actually just want a PDF, but let's just talk right now about just packaging files, and we'll talk about printing or making a PDF separately. So we'll package this all up. They say don't do illegal things with fonts. You say, okay, don't show me this again. And it copies everything. So now you still have all your files where they originally were, but now you also on your, in my case on my desktop here, I have a folder, and these are copies. Copies of my ad, copies of all the linked graphics, and fonts that could be collected. So it collected those fonts for me. And so if I give anybody this folder, on your computer, actually, when you open up this file, it'll automatically activate the fonts that are in that folder, which is awesome. And this file is linked to these links. So everything should just open up and you're good to go. You have everything you need. You have the links, you have the fonts. If it's an Adobe font, that's going to get downloaded and automatically activated through InDesign. When you first open up the file, it'll say, hey, you're missing some fonts. Do you want to activate them? And it'll download them and install them for you. So this is anything that somebody needs to work with this file. It's good for archiving a project at the end and sharing it with other people that need to work on it, or sending to a printer if they request a native InDesign file. I do say if, because a lot of printers will not want a native file. They just want a PDF. So let's talk about PDFing. So when you go to make a print or a PDF yourself, let's say you're printing it yourself. We'll do this first and then we'll go to PDF. If you're printing it yourself because you want to just test it out and see if it looks good, you'll go to print, so file print, and then you choose your printer, whatever your printer is. And then down here, you want to make sure that your print is going to fit on your sheet of paper. So in this case, I'm trying to print an 8.5 by 11 on an 8.5 by 11, but this is 8.5 by 11 plus a bleed. So under marks and bleed, right now it's using the bleed settings, which means it's adding 1/8 of an inch all the way around. So technically speaking, on my printer, I can only do 8.5 by 11. So I'm not going to be able to fit this on and actually bleed. Now, the best I can do is I could turn off the bleed, so I'm not trying to print that bleed, so at least it will actually fit it on. But when I print this out, there's going to be a little bit of white all the way around my page, because my printer cannot print to the edge. Most printers cannot, and I cannot print on a bigger sheet of paper. Now, if I had a large format printer or a larger format printer, I could go in and choose a different page size. So, maybe I could go in there and choose a big size page, depending on the printer. On my printer, I can't do this actual paper size, but let's say you could. So you could choose, let's print my 8.5 by 11 on a big tabloid, and let's center it in the middle of the page. Let's include my bleed, and let's include crop marks so that I know where to trim off the bleed. And then you can actually print on a larger sheet of paper and cut it down. So that's how you'd be able to print it. But if all you can do is print on a smaller sheet of paper, you could do the letter size page. You could choose to scale it down. So like, let's say my printer can only do an 8.5 by 11. What I could choose to do is I could choose to scale it to fit. And I'll have to scale it down a little bit. It has to scale it down about 10% in this case. But at least this way, I'll be able to print the bleed. I'll be able to print the little guides there. I'll be able to trim it down. Or I wouldn't actually have to print the bleed and the crop marks. I could just print the thing. And as long as I'm really careful about trimming, that would get it a little bit bigger. So it's only a little bit smaller than it has to be. So it would be kind of minimizing the amount of white all the way around. I'd have to be careful as I trim it just so I don't slip. But that way it's only a little bit smaller than it really would. So not quite 100% trustworthy in terms of size, but it's pretty close. But that's what you're kind of thinking of, is what size paper are you printing on, and then what's its orientation on that sheet of paper. And then you print that out, and then it will come out of your personal printer. But what about sending it to a printer, a commercial printer or online printer, whatever you're sending it? You're sending it out for printing, and they're going to print it and send it back. In many cases, they like you to export a PDF. So I'm going to export a PDF. And there are different kinds of PDF here. We're not doing interactive. That would be if you're creating things like a form in a PDF, because InDesign is actually very good at creating PDFs, whether they are for electronic distribution or for print. But we're going to do print. I wish they wouldn't necessarily just say print, because these could still just be a digital PDF you put on your website for a high quality download. So don't think of them as only for print. I think of this as like general normal PDF, and then these are specialized interactive ones that have things like form fields and stuff. As long as you want to create like your normal PDF, print is what you want. Just think of that as the normal regular PDF, like a regular PDF. And I'm going to put this on my desktop as something just simply Dan's Australia ad. When I hit save, I'll see the options for how this is made. There are a bunch of presets here which are in square brackets. All the ones that have normal names with no square brackets, those are presets that I have made myself. So let's say, for example, there's a press quality. So if you're going to press, you're going to print this book, brochure, magazine, whatever it is, and you're going to send it off to press, you could choose something like press quality. But be careful. By default, they do not include bleed. So if you are going to print with a bleed, you need to include that. Whatever you had set up in your guides with your bleed guides, you need to check that on. And then you're also going to want your printer marks as well. If you're not, first of all, if you're not sure about settings, ask your printer. Talk to them. Find out if they have a preset they want you to load, because you can actually load in presets into here. So if your printer gives you a PDF preset, you can go into your Adobe presets, go into define, and you can load in a preset that your printer gives you. So if your printer provides some specific settings, you could load those in if you have a downloadable file. If you don't, I'm going to give you some recommendations of things you can do. But go with whatever your printer says if they have specific settings. Like if they say go with a certain standard, one of these standards, go with whatever they say. If they say, you know, include the bleed, but only give me crop marks, you know, just listen to your printer. Ask your printer, what are your preferred settings? And you know, if they don't say anything, if it's like maybe an online place that doesn't have recommendations, if you're going to have a bleed, of course you need to include that bleed. At a minimum, you at least need to have crop marks for them to kind of know where to trim it off. Unless it's like an online service where when you upload it, you kind of upload it into their thing and it kind of fits into place, including the bleed. Sometimes in those cases, you don't always need crop marks in that situation. But if you're sending it to like more of like a hand done, like, you know, custom printed place, they're going to need to know where those crop marks are. And in fact, they'll probably want all of the printer marks there. Yeah. So just so you can see here, with something like press quality, they don't do a lot of compression. Their goal here is high quality. So only images that would be super high resolution, like anything over 450 pixels per inch. If it's over 450, they'll cut it down to 300. But otherwise, they just leave the resolution alone, and they're not worried about getting your file sizes small. They go with the maximum image quality that they can go with because they want the best looking images. So they're not concerned about small file size. They're concerned about high quality. If you are concerned with a small file size, like I want to email you a PDF, that's a different situation. So with something like press quality, it's high resolution, maximum image quality. I care about the quality, not the file size. If you have something like smallest file size, there, in that case, this is maybe to email somebody. You really care about a small file size because you don't want to be able to you want to be able to email it. You don't want to have to maybe upload it to Dropbox and copy a link or something. You just want to get it to fit in an email. Now, technically they say small list. It should be small file size. You can actually go smaller for sure, but it's a small file size. Notice that anything that's over 150 pixels per inch gets cut down to 100. And that's for color images and grayscale images, depending on what you need. Now, grayscale, they actually, if it's over 225, they cut it down to 150. So that's where I say it's smallest, although not it's small, but not the smallest. You could go even smaller. So they're going with an okay resolution, and they're going with low image quality. Let's say you save this PDF and it's still too big. You still can't attach it to an email, and you really want to attach it to an email. You could say, you know what, anything that's over 72, oh, you got to do 72 here first, and then you could say 72. You could say anything that's at all above 72, cut it down to 72. Same thing here with grayscale. Anything that's over 72, cut it down to 72. Most people probably aren't going to have monochrome images. You're probably going to have grayscale or color. So now anything that's over 72 pixels per inch, which is like the lowest screen resolution possible, would be cut down to 72 pixels per inch. If that's still too big, you could go even lower, like just the absolute bare minimum image quality, if that's still too big. But take it one step at a time and just see how low you need to go. And if you're doing this for email purposes, just so somebody can see it, you probably don't need to include the bleed. So you probably don't need that. You don't need to include crop marks or anything. So you don't need to have those things for like an email thing. And if this is something you do a lot, you can actually save yourself a preset once you've set those settings. You can click Save Preset, give it a name, like I've actually already done. I have an email preset. In the email preset, I don't have bleeds on. I don't have crop marks. And in here, I go with the slightly better quality with the 150 and the 100. But if I wanted something even smaller, I could go even smaller. You can choose what you want your settings to be. So let me export both. So let's say we go to press quality and we want our bleed and all of our printer marks. So let's do one for print. All right. And then let's also export another one. And this one, I'm going to say, so that was the print one. And let's say this one is for email. And this one is going to be small. So I'll go with our smallest file size. I won't go super small. I'll just go with the default smallest. For this, I'm not going to include bleeds. I'm not going to include crop marks. I'm just going to go with smallest file size and export that. They do say that basically you're working in CMYK, and when you go to smallest file size, they're converting to RGB. So the color space isn't the same. You can just continue with that. All right. So now let me go to my desktop here and open up. So notice the difference in file size. Now, this is a very small document. I only had some pretty, I had two images, one of which is pixel-based, one of which is vector, which vector graphics are small. So this is not a big one, even for the print size. But if you have like a 100 or 200 page document with tons of high-res images in there, these documents can certainly grow in size. So even my print quality one is still emailable size, but you can see how much smaller the email size is. We certainly cut that down. But let's open this up. And here we can see all the crop marks here. You can see the color bars, the registration bars. You can see it did include the bleed area, so they trim it down where those crop marks are. A good high quality printable file there. And then for the email, let's open that one up. In this case, there's no crop marks or anything. Now, if you look closely here, there is some like banding or striping of colors in the background because they compress the image more. If you look at the quality here, it's all kind of blurry. Whereas if we look at the original, this is much better quality. I got all that detail in there. It's not blurry. It's not banding the colors. So, you do get a better quality with your bigger file size. So I like to see how big it is when I export with high quality. And then if I need it to be smaller, then I start to go trying to make it smaller if I need to. And then these PDFs are something, in the case of an email, you could email that to a client or somebody for approval. With the high quality one, the printable one, you could send that off to a printer. You could upload it to an online printing service, and then they can do a high quality print from that PDF. So for a lot of printing services, they want the PDF. They don't actually want the collected packaged files because they don't want the InDesign file. They don't want to have to worry about opening InDesign, worrying about fonts. They just want to open up a PDF and print the PDF basically. So when you are packaging, like we did before, just to point out here, so let's go back to package one more time. So when you do the package, yes, we're going to save that file. You can also create the PDF while you're doing it. So if you do want to give somebody a package with all your InDesign files, the fonts, the graphics, and you want to throw a PDF in there as well so that they could just grab that PDF real quick, you could do that. And you get all your presets here. Now, if you want to customize the settings, you can't customize them here. You got to go with an already made preset, which is why you might want to save a preset ahead of time before you come into here. But as long as you've got a pre-made preset that you've saved, then you can go with that preset. And let me do that here. I'll do this as the version 2. And that'll collect all that together. And this time, when we do it, we have the InDesign file, we have the fonts, we have the linked graphics, and we also have a PDF as well that we could give to somebody. And that's nice if somebody just wants to quickly look at the file without having to open up the InDesign file and turn on fonts and that sort of stuff. And also, if you're archiving, again, if you're archiving a project, if you have the InDesign file, you have the fonts, you have the graphics, and you have a PDF, I mean, you have everything you need for an archived project. Everything is there ready to go for your particular project. So that's been an introduction to InDesign. I know we haven't gone over everything that InDesign can do. There's a lot more that you can do with InDesign, but hopefully that shows you some of the text and image manipulation you could do. Before I let you go, I do want to wrap up with just one final little fun thing. When you go into File, Print, there's a little Easter egg in here. This is not a useful thing to know. This is just a fun thing to know. Back in the day of Quark, Quark had a little alien that would come out and destroy things. It would come out and zap boxes and it would destroy them. So to pay homage to Quark's little alien that was in there, but it was a destructive alien, InDesign added the friendly alien. So in InDesign, if you go to File, Print, and you save a preset called Friendly Alien, capital F, capital A, space in between, Friendly Alien, and you click OK. With that Friendly Alien preset selected, you can click right here in this preview area, and the Friendly Alien will appear. This is not a useful thing. This is just a fun thing. So if you want your friend, the alien, to come out, now watch. Don't miss him. He's going to come out and he's going to wave. Boom. There he waves, and then he goes away. And so the friendly alien just comes out. He makes an appearance, waves hello, and says hi to everybody. That's a little homage to Quark Express and the alien that was in there. That is a little fun that you can have with InDesign. Now, speaking of fun, if you want to learn more about InDesign, Noble Desktop, of course, has additional classes, things you can learn more. So if I go here to nobledesktop.com and I go to InDesign, you can type in the search there, but if you just go here to InDesign, we have some classes for you. For the most thorough course, we've got an InDesign Bootcamp, which is an 18-hour course, and that goes from the beginning all the way through advanced concepts. We go into style sheets and master pages and all that good stuff. If you just want a quick hands-on course, we have an InDesign in a day. That's the first day, the first 6 hours of our InDesign Bootcamp. So we do split up the bootcamp, that if you want to split up those 18 hours into 6 hours for the first day and 12 hours for the second and third day. And when I say day, that would be like a week or a weekend, a weeknight or a weekend if you're doing it. So these 18 hours, they can be broken up into 3 days or 3 weeks if you're doing it on nights or weekends. By the way, for those of you who are attending live, we actually have an InDesign Bootcamp or InDesign in a day starting tomorrow night. So if you're interested in taking that, we actually have one starting tomorrow night. If you're watching this recording, just check out the dates that are on the website here. But you can do InDesign in a day, the first 6 hours of that class. And if you ever want to come back for the additional 12 hours, you always can. But it just depends on how much InDesign you want to learn. Also, if you want a bigger certificate program, we have a graphic design certificate. In that graphic design certificate, which is a complete certificate with Adobe apps, in here you can learn InDesign as well as Photoshop, Illustrator. Those will teach you the program, so you can learn how to use InDesign to do your page layout. You can learn how to use Adobe Photoshop for retouching your photos and creating graphics. Illustrator for drawing vector graphics like logos and icons, like I had the Australia logo here in InDesign. And then a graphic design bootcamp. This is going to focus on the what makes good design. So once you know how to use the apps to create a design, we want to make sure those designs look good. So that's what we cover in the graphic design bootcamp. So that's going to focus on typography and color and composition and creating projects for your portfolio using good design concepts. So as part of this bigger graphic design certificate, you can learn these apps and learn design concepts. And actually, InDesign is the first class in this certificate. So that's actually starting tomorrow night for anybody that's interested. You can either take just the InDesign class, or you can take it as part of this certificate program if you want to get a more well-rounded education if you're getting into design. These are kind of three of the biggest programs, most popular programs that every graphic designer typically needs to know. So it's a good, well-rounded program if you're interested in learning even more. Hope this was helpful for you and that this got you a start using InDesign. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody, and hope it was useful. And hopefully we'll see you in a future class at some point. For the classes also, by the way, the classes are done live online. At some point, we're going to be having in-person classes at Noble Desktop again. We're not exactly sure when those are happening, but for anybody, we've been doing online live classes for years before COVID hit. So we've been allowing people to screen share into the instructor computer. We use Zoom for our online education, so you can use Zoom, you can screen share in. The classes are done live, so they are all held on Eastern time because we're in New York City. But anybody from anywhere can join those classes. You just kind of tune in at that particular time. And they're all hands-on interactive classes, so you get to see what the instructor is talking about. There's practice, you'll do exercises, so it's a hands-on class, unlike these free seminars where it's just demonstration for this. So thank you so much, and hope you enjoyed the seminar and that you got a lot out of this and that you can get started using InDesign.